Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. And this is North Carolina from the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry by Albert G. Mackey. North Carolina. The early history of Masonry in no state is more uncertain than in that of North Carolina, in consequence of the carelessness of the authorities who have attempted to write its early annals. Thus, Robert Williams, the Grand Secretary, in a letter written to the Grand Lodge of Kentucky in 1808, said that the Grand Lodge of North Carolina was constituted by charter issued from the Grand Lodge of Scotland in the year 1761, signed by Henry Somerset, Duke of Beaufort, as Grand Master, and attested by George John Spencer, Earl of Spencer, as Grand Secretary. Now, this statement contains on its face the evidences of flagrant error. 1. The Duke of Beaufort never was Grand Master of Scotland. 2. The Grand Master of Scotland in 1761 was the Earl of Elgin. 3. The Earl of Spencer never was Grand Secretary either of England or Scotland, but Samuel Spencer was Grand Secretary of the Grand Lodge of England from 1757 to 1767 and died in 1768. 4. The Duke of Beaufort was not Grand Master of England in 1761, but held that office from 1767 to 1771. There is no mention in the printed records of the Grand Lodge of England of a charter at any time granted for a provincial Grand Lodge in North Carolina. But in 2 lists of lodges chartered by that body, I find that on August 21st, 1767, a warrant was granted for the establishment of Royal White Hart Lodge at Halifax in North Carolina. I'm inclined to believe that this is the true date of the introduction of Masonry into that state. A record in the transactions of the St. John's Grand Lodge of Massachusetts says that on October 2nd, 1767, that body granted a deputation to Thomas Cooper, Master of Pitt County Lodge, as Deputy Grand Master of the province. But there is no evidence that he ever exercised the prerogatives of the office. Judge Martin, in a discourse delivered on June 24, 1789, says that Joseph Montford was appointed towards the year 1769 as Provincial Grand Master by the Duke of Beaufort, and that in 1771 he constituted St. John's Lodge at Newbern. This was probably the true date of the Provincial Grand Lodge of North Carolina, for in 1787 we find 9 lodges in the territory, 5 of which at least had the provincial numbers 2, 3, 4, 5, and 8, while the Royal Hart Lodge retained its number on the English register as 403, a number which agrees with that of the English lists in my possession. On December 9, 1787, a convention of lodges met at Tarboro and organized the Grand Lodge of the State of North Carolina, electing Honorable Samuel Johnston Grand Master. There was a Grand Chapter in North Carolina at an early period in the present century, which ceased to exist about the year 1827, but Royal Arch Masonry was cultivated by 4 chapters instituted by the General Grand Chapter. On June 28, 1847, the Grand Chapter was reorganized. The Grand Council was organized in June 1860 by councils which had been established by the author of this work under the authority of the Supreme Council of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. The Grand Lodge of England warranted a lodge in North Carolina at Wilmington in March 1754 or 1755. This was afterwards known as St. John's No. 1. A Grand Lodge of North Carolina was organized in 1771, which met at New Bern and Edenton. But its early history is obscure owing to the supposed destruction of the records by the English during the War of the Revolution. Representatives of 7 lodges, Unanimity, St. John's, Royal Edwin, Royal White Hart, Royal William, Union, and Blandford Butte, met on December 9, 1787, to reorganize the Grand Lodge. In 1856, St. John's College was established at Oxford, but during the War of 1861 through 1865, when it was vacated by the students, it was converted into one of the best orphan homes in the country. In charity, as in everything else, this Grand Lodge has always achieved success. The first mention of capitular Freemasonry in North Carolina occurs in the proceedings of the 4th convocation of the General Grand Chapter, where it appears that a charter was to have been issued to Concord, chapter at Wilmington, May 4, 1815, by the General Grand King. He also granted one to Phoenix chapter at Fayetteville, September 1, 1815. At the 13th convocation of the General Grand Chapter held on September 14, 1847, at Columbus, Ohio, the General Grand Secretary reported that a Grand Chapter of North Carolina had once existed but had ceased work 20 years before, that according to information just received, it had lately been reorganized. An assembly of representatives of 3 chapters had duly adopted a constitution and elected officers on June 28, 1847. On September 16, 1847, the Grand Chapter of North Carolina was, after the alteration of 1 or 2 articles in its constitution, granted legal authority by the General Grand Chapter of the United States. 5 councils had been chartered in North Carolina before the organization of the Grand Council. In each case, the document was signed by the Supreme Council of the Southern Jurisdiction. All 5 were represented at a convention for the organization of the Grand Council at Fayetteville, June 21, 1822. In 1859, the Grand Chapter resisted an attempt to incorporate the degrees with the chapter by a declaration to the effect that it desired to exercise no such control. A Grand Council was organized June 6, 1860, but owing to the Civil War, no meeting was held until 1866, and in 1883 it was dissolved altogether. The degrees then came under the control of the Grand Chapter until 1887, when the Grand Council was again established. The first official mention of Templarism in North Carolina appeared in the Proceedings of the Grand Encampment of the United States for September 19, 1826. The issue of a charter to Fayetteville encampment, among others, on December 21, 1821, was the item in question. This encampment ceased work at an early date, and the details about an attempt made in 1845 to start another are not known. On September 16, 1850, it was resolved by the General Grand Encampment of the United States to grant renewed authority to Fayetteville and Wilmington. On May 10, 1881, the Grand Commandery of North Carolina was established. On November 21, 1892, Asheville Lodge of Perfection, No. 1 at Asheville, was granted a charter. Charters were issued to a chapter of Rose Croix, a council of Kadosh, and a consistory, all located at Charlotte, namely Mecklenburg No. 1, October 5, 1901, Charlotte No. 1, October 23, 1907, Carolina No. 1, December 18, 1907, respectively, under the southern jurisdiction of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.